Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Cycle 16. Due to technical difficulties, we're starting a little bit late, so be very brief. Our good friend, longtime friend, Tom Hunter is back with us, and he always stimulates our thoughts. So take it away, Tom.
Okay, let me get started up here properly. Start with my desktop. Okay, can you see that now?
Okay, you might need to get on and tell him.
He's muted. Tom, if you can hear us, we can't hear you. You appear to have muted yourself.
I can hear you just fine. I've muted myself somehow. Okay, let me.
But I'm sure whatever you can hear me is very interesting.
Okay, you can hear me now?
Yes, now we have you. Okay, what do you see? Okay, let's try it.
All right. Thank you very much. Well, it's a pleasure to be with you. I think this is a great program, and I've enjoyed my participation in the past. I want to talk about the life of and a little bit about a book that will come out in just a couple of weeks called Self-Control or State Control, You Decide. It's a book of short and I hope very readable essays that will appear in 1 month. And we're about 35,000 copies, but also it'll be online at zero price. I never say free, but zero price. As a downloadable PDF, it'll be an ebook, and it will be available at no charge under a Creative Commons International License. So anyone who wants to reprint it, feel free. Now, it's part of this series of books that I brought out.
Sorry, Tom. Hold on a second.
Like this.
We're having a horrible feedback problem.
Freedom, the capital F. Okay.
Hold on a second, Tom.
I think you want to mute yourselves there, so that
Yes.
we don't have that. And now I can't hear you to tell me whether I should continue.
Okay, let's try it again. We think we've got it. We'll try. And I'm muting myself so we don't have feedback, at least from this machine. Go ahead.
Very, very good. In the series of books that's come out, and the morality of capitalism, why liberty, peace, love, and liberty, and now the new one, self-control or state control. It's got a series of original essays by Philip Booth and Steve Davies on the possibility of regulation without the state, and Lisa Conyers, who's a journalist, wrote him When One Becomes Dependent on the Welfare State. Jeffrey Myron from Harvard University on the negative consequences of the war on drugs. Myself with some of the more philosophical issues. Sarah Squire of Liberty Fund on the role of art and literature in developing self-control. John Tierney, science correspondent for the New York Times, on the neuroscience of self-control. Nima Sanandaji from Sweden, actually, of moral norms in the Nordic welfare states, and Professor Lynn Kiesling of more institutions that help us to be responsible, such as property rights. The relationship between freedom on the one hand and responsibility. And those two concepts are very closely and intimately connected. Frequently, when you mention freedom, I think, what is it that a lot of people think of? Irresponsibility, partying all the time, not thinking about tomorrow, having no commitments, being drunk all the time, selfish, lawless, and just in general being out of control. That's a common view among people who believe that government has to take charge of things. When people are free, they're simply out of control. On the other hand, when you talk about responsibility, what comes to the minds of many people is being lectured about sitting up straight and eating your vegetables, and that it is particularly boring, that responsibility has a color, tedious or boring. And I think that's a big responsibility, are very intimately entwined, and you cannot enjoy one without the other. F.A. Hayek, in his great book, The Constitution of Liberty, argued that liberty not only means that the individual has both the opportunity and the burden of choice, it also means that he must bear the consequences of his actions and will receive praise or blame for them. Liberty and responsibility are inseparable. Very strong language from Hayek, but I think he was fundamentally right. Now, some people argue responsibility is the price we pay. Big mistake. It's the reward for being free. It gives you the ability to say, I did that. I was responsible for that. I built that. I am responsible for this family. We raised these children. I built this business. I made that. That is one of the great payoffs in life and one of the greatest satisfactions possible. And when one is under the control of others, the ability to say that is diminished or eliminated. Now, a moral life, for those who are concerned about living a good life, or a moral life, when individuals have both their freedom and responsibility. Aristotle thought that the marks of moral behavior were praise and blame. And praise and blame are dependent on well or not to act as they do. So you don't get either praised or blamed if someone else forces your hand. There's no praise, there's no generosity in having your money taken by the welfare state to give to other people, for example. That's not being generous. That's just following the orders and avoiding going to prison or being punished by the state. Indeed, individual identity and moral responsibility are to be able to claim your freedom and your responsibility. One of the great early libertarian tracts from 1646 by Richard Overton, which was actually written when he was in prison, made the case very strongly. He said, to every individual in nature is given an individual property by nature, not to be invaded or usurped by any. For everyone, as he is himself, so he has a self-propriety, namely control over himself, else could he not be himself. This theme has been articulated by libertarian thinkers of many sorts, John Locke, but also very powerfully by Frederick Douglass, one of the great libertarian figures of the 19th century, who argued that to be a free person you had to be able to say, myself. He said the slave couldn't even say that because his self belonged to another person. To be able to say myself is to assert control over your own life. Now, everyone's individual all the time, and you libertarians are hyper-rationalists who think that everyone is rational. That's not the case. F.A. Hayek argued in a very important, powerful essay, Individualism, True and False. Individualism is man as a highly rational and intelligent being, but instead as a very irrational and fallible being who is only in the course of a social process. Some people think that the case for liberty rests on the idea that for you, I always know what's best for me. But actually, moral experience in the world shows this case. There may be a reasonably good presumption that other people are better judges of their interest than you or I are. But in fact, we know many cases where people they don't think about the future. They act irrationally. So the case for it not rest on the one is always the best behavior, but relations of human rationality. That's why we don't want anyone to have absolute power over us, because those people will be just as fallible and just as prone to irrationality as all the rest of us. What we want is a social system of liberty, and which people take might respond merit of the ability of the individual, which for their is referring here to attitudes. Liberty is control that might be done by bad men can do least harm. It is a social system which does not depend for its functioning on our finding good men for running it, on all men becoming better than they now are, but which makes use of men. Here, of course, he means human beings, not only male, I think that's a sounder foundation for the idea of individual freedom and responsibility than the manifestly view that every human being is the best judge of his or her interests at any given moment. Now, good news, all their good rational control are moral given for exercise in one of the authors, John Tierney, is co-author of a very important book, which I read and which I found very stimulating and frankly very helpful, co-authored with the experimental or empirical psychologist Roy Baumeister. And what he put it, research into willpower and self-control is psychology's best hope for contributing to human welfare. Discovered, was that the latest research in a great experimental psychology shows how we psychology can and to see more people years. It helps graduate students a great deal and so on who are
Tom,
into
I'm sorry, I'm going to jump in. Tom, we're having
psychology under.
Can you hear me? I'm sorry, we're having sound problems. I
can hear you.
I can hear you, but you're chopping up and your words are overlapping with each other. I'm going to restart the session, and hopefully that will clear up our sound.
Okay. Shall I go back to the beginning?
No. We've been able to follow your slides. I would start with this slide again, but give me just a moment. Stay in the hangout where you are, and I'm going to repeat my side, okay? Hold on. Okay.
Okay. You just tell me when.
He's frozen.
I'm just waiting on your instructions. I can hear you just fine.
Oh, yeah, you're sounding much louder and clearer now. That's good. Okay, so the screen share is back. We are live. We'll get out of the way. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the confusion. Tom, carry on.
Okay. One of the features I mentioned, Hayek's perspective, is that we do not have to presuppose perfectly rational beings or perfect case for individual freedom and responsibility. We want people to be responsible is to encourage them to become better people. Norbert Elias, a most interesting sociologist, and I think very important for understanding the free society, did a great deal of research on the way in which societies degrees, more precisely individuals in those societies. And he argued that complex, not more state control, which is the way that many people see it, but rather a higher degree of self-control. As he put it, as the interdependence of people increases with the increasing division of labor, everyone becomes increasingly dependent on everyone else, even those of high social rank on those people who are socially inferior and weaker. Here he's writing at more or less the end of the age of aristocracy. The latter become so much the equals of the former that they, the socially change feelings, even in the presence of their peers. This, remember, when he's writing, it's still at the time of the great European empires and aristocrats, and he's talking about the emergence of the modern world. It's only in this connection that the armor of restraint So what is fast remarkable is the degree to which people to acquire additional self-control, and it helps people live together as social equals. The fact that all of us are mutually dependent on other, especially take granted. The individual's path and the way to become self-determining more complicated. The demands on his or her conscious and unconscious self-control increase. And as I point out in chapters in the book, his research started by looking at books of etiquette. Very interesting taking off point. Books on how to become a better person, how to get along at dinner parties, and so look at these books from only a few hundred years ago. They encouraged adults to do things that in most of the world we would consider shocking and disgusting if they were done even by children. Even children have already internalized control that were considered necessary to teach to adults just 300 or 400 years ago. The free society and the ever-growing complexity of social relations requires that people be able to restrain their impulses more and more, and to be able to think about the concept, that is to say, to acquire greater degrees of self-control. That's especially important in advanced and complex free social orders. Now, there's good news in this regard. You can develop techniques to improve your self-control. Not only young people, but older people as well can improve themselves and grow and become better people. You can learn how to make control of your life. John T. shares some of those in an appendix on tips for self-improvement and suggestions for further study. Unfortunately, there's bad news as well. Government insists that you should have neither the freedom nor the responsibility to make those decisions for yourself, whether it's saving for retirement, choosing your medical care, ingesting what you like, and so on. Two elements of the bad news that are carefully documented in the book. What happens when people's responsibility is taken from them? Two graphs here that I put up. The one on federal spending is from the United States. The entitlement spending will receive from the state has gone up quite dramatically, even just in the last 45 years in comparison to other kinds of federal spending. The other one is a bit more shocking, the one on the right, and it documents the rise in young adults who are receiving disability payments. People are considered permanently out of the labor force in Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, the Netherlands, Sweden, and the United Kingdom. And the interesting dashed line there is Norway. The vast availability of resources to the welfare state from the oil money, that's starting to decline a bit as oil prices have fallen, have meant more and more young people have just said, I'm not going to work at all. So what's striking about these numbers is that they are about societies which have become wealthier and healthier, and yet the percentage of persons considered permanently disabled is increasing. And that's something that's remarkable. It erodes social norms about not being a free rider on other people, which is called benefit morale. Chapter in the book looked at the world value surveys, and in Nordic countries, the percentage of Swedes and Norwegians who agreed with the statement, quote, claiming government benefits to which you are not entitled is never justifiable, was 82% of Swedes and 80% of Norwegians in 1981 to 84. However, as the welfare state continued on, those numbers dropped dramatically. So in the 2005 to 8 survey, 56% of Norwegians and 61% of Swedes believed it was never right to claim benefits. And then those numbers in 2010-2014 are just shocking. 55% answered that it was never right to overuse benefits. So that the morale, the system of social trust is eroded over time, even in wealthy countries such as the Nordic countries. And then, for more bad news, there's a people's factory, the war on drugs, well, but most are from the United States. And what we see is a shocking number of people dying of drug overdoses in the United States. Basically, ones are because of the war on drugs, because of adulterated drugs, because of lack of information about the potency of the drug. It's not like going and buying a beer or a glass of vodka. You know the difference between the two, and the consequence for health is shocking and very disturbing. And then in addition, gang sorts. Since 2006, well over 100,000 people have been murdered, often in very grisly ways, just in Mexico alone, all as a consequence of the war on drugs. Mexico and other Central American countries are being torn apart by this, and as we'll see in a moment, it's caused massive violence and criminality in the United States as well. This chart on expenditures on prohibition per capita, the amount of money that was spent to prohibit people from taking alcohol or narcotics from 1900 until roughly the present. And what do we see? Massive increase in expenditures during prohibition of alcohol, during which time the murder was, when alcohol was re-legalized, homicide rate fell for 11 consecutive years. Then, early 1970s, the war on the expenses for the taxpayers go up dramatically, and a massive increase in homicide rates as well. Health consequences from alcohol during the Prohibition period, quite shocking and disturbing. Prohibition did not save people from the diseases of alcoholism. It increased the rate of death. And then finally, of the impact on civil liberties, the wiretaps in the United States undertake bulk taken by them, allowing people from enforcement of narcotics consumption and trading, so that we have this massive surveillance state in order to combat the war on drugs. Now, what freedom requires is not commands or prohibitions, but simply the rule of law. It's a very nice statement in Hayek's book, The Road to Serfdom, about what the rule of law is about. The government is prevented from stultifying individual efforts by ad hoc action. Within the known rules of the game, the individual is free to pursue, certain that the powers of government will not be used deliberately to frustrate his efforts. We have found systematically when you deviate from that, you generate terrible adverse social consequences. years later, in his book Law, Legislation, and Liberty, that law should consist of purpose-independent rules which govern the conduct of individuals towards each other. No number of further instances. And by defining a protected domain of each, enable an order of actions to form itself wherein the individuals can make feasible plans. The law is not about telling you to do this, not do that, and sit up straight, and take this pill, don't take that pill. The law is about creating a framework within which people can pursue their actions and to coordinate voluntarily with others. Finally, some more good news. As I mentioned, you can learn how to achieve greater self-control and to realize your own aims. One of the lessons that comes out from be depleted. So a very simple thing all of us can benefit from, economize on it. Don't make a very important decision after you've made lots of small ones. You'll be tired. Set that aside. Say, today is the day, or now is the one. I'm making a big decision. Don't make any decisions of any significance before that. Writing down your goals, I apologize for the typo there, helps you to achieve them. Making lists of things you want to do is one of the most important ways of getting a lot of things done. And it's so satisfying. You get a reward when you cross it off your list. The best ways to lose weight, and this is documented in study after study, is to buy a scale and weigh yourself. Losing weight is not easy for many people. Controlling their weight is not easy. It's not the case that overweight people are bad people. That's false. It's hard to do. But one of the ways that people are able to control their weight better, all other things held constant, is just getting a weight scale. and standing on it every day and knowing where they are in relation to their goals. And there are many other ways to monitor our behavior financially and other ways as well. And finally, on that list, it turns out that if you try to go cold turkey, say, I'm not going to eat any cookies at all, I'm cutting them out of my diet, most people will break the resolution and binge. Turns out it's much better if you tell yourself, I'm not going to eat that dessert now. Later on this evening, I'll have some dessert. And when you do that, the total amount of dessert that you eat is less. It's like telling the childish part of your brain that wants a cookie now, you say, okay, you'll get a cookie later. You're able then to control your cravings much better. You should reward yourself for difficult but desirable behavior. Link with something that you like and anticipate. It might be much easier to do those things that are hard to do. You should try to, when you think of your future, this is especially important for young people, visualize your future self. There are even computer programs you can get that. Upload a photo or have it take a picture of yourself and then age it. Look at that person. Say, how grateful will she or he be to my present self if I save more money or if I do something that will be beneficial to the future self. Now, here's one that sounds like bad news, but actually it can be good news. It turns out you can't really eliminate bad habits. They're instantiated in the neural pathways of your brain. What you can do, and this is again demonstrated in empirical psychology, is replace bad habits with better ones. Identify the cue, the thing that starts you doing the things you shouldn't do, whether it's biting your nails or overspending or binge drinking or arguing with your spouse. What's the thing that sets you off to do that? What's the routine you engage in you don't want to do? And what's the reward you might get at the end? Then, having identified that, substitute a new routine that you do whenever the cue appears and then reward yourself at the end. It's the best way to replace a bad habit with a good one. But it's very difficult to actually get rid of a bad habit. Our ability to see and hear, which he said we use because we have them. Here's them with the human virtues. There, and the virtues we have because we use them. Live. So I hope that you'll watch for the book. I hope that you'll enjoy ways that you can enjoy it quietly, slowly acquire the habits. Yeah, the habits help you to achieve happier and freer lives. With that, I'll conclude thoughts to share very much.
Well, Tom, I'm going to have to ask you to imagine a standing ovation and applause that will be undying here. We did have more technical difficulties, so we were able to follow along your slides, and we could occasionally hear your lucid words and beneficiating them, but the online audience apparently could hear you just fine, so we didn't want to pull the plug on you because everybody not in Lithuania was benefiting from your lucidity. So you kind of come in and out.
You can explain to them I was speaking Lithuanian. Okay.
So if we're patient, though, I think we can probably do some Q&A. Or maybe not.
I'm ready. I'll listen slowly.
Yeah. I mean, just imagine you're on Mars or something, and it can take time for the transmission to go back and forth. Does anybody have any questions for Tom? What did you say? There are none? I thought I saw some earlier.
If Tom would summarize his presentation into 3 main points, what would these
What were the major points? If you had to summarize on one hand the major points you covered, what would those be?
Number one, freedom and responsibility go together. You cannot
Freedom and
grasp one, so that's a
responsibility.
very important.
Got that. Okay.
The second thing is that we can learn to be more responsible. And that's a very important part of living the life of a free human being. The third point is there are very serious negative consequences when the state tries to either take away your freedom or take away your responsibility. Those generate very bad consequences for the individual involved and for the whole social order.
Okay.
And then finally, there are lots of things that every one of us can do to people. It may sound like an old, but every one of us can experience personal growth and can become better people. We can become more, we can plan better for the future, and so on. Last point. This is important, in my opinion, because it also can diminish the demand side for the interventionist state. Many people say we have to use state control because other people make bad decisions. One way to respond to that, not the only way, but one way, is help people to make better decisions by teaching them the sciences of self-control. I hope that was understandable.
That was. We got a little fuzz there in the end, but that
Okay.
clarified things.
And I see Jake there. Hi, Jake.
So I'm thinking about your with the old Simpsons character and the librarian telling us to shh. I think that's worth going back to, because everything you said is very reasonable. It's very rational. But it sounds kind of like that librarian. You know, be responsible, be grown up, everything will be better. But I really like the point you made at the beginning of that this isn't a burden. This isn't a terrible thing. This is the joy. This is something to celebrate. That, yeah, yay, we get to be responsible.
It's the reward, ultimately. And when you think about growing up, one of the things that teenagers usually want as they're adults, they want to have all the freedom but no responsibility. That's normal part of human development. But adults understand responsibility is not just a burden. It is a joy. The ability to say, I did that. That's my accomplishment. And you can only do that in a free society.
Right. If somebody forces you to do anything, even if you do it well, you have no great achievement there to be proud of. That's a very excellent point. I think we could probably come up with more questions, unless somebody's really burning, though. I think I'm going to put this audience out of its misery here, and we're going to reboot, restart, and see if we can troubleshoot this thing for our next time. Thank you so much for joining us, Tom. I'm sorry about the technical troubles. We'll try to do better next time. Have a great day.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, and hello from France. Turn off.